There's such a massive array of different ways of dealing with mental health these days that we lost sight of what is it that's actually meaningful, logical, and practical, and has real impact versus what has become just very widely accepted theories and philosophies that have not solved real problems. One of the things that I always hold myself accountable to is to ensure that any advice I give, any perspectives I offer has to stand up to scrutiny. When I say it has to stand up to scrutiny, what I mean is that you can't just present something because you learned it that way. That's blind following. You can't just push a philosophy or a modality just because some people got benefit out of it and that's why it must be good. Because the reason why some people will benefit from something and others won't is very complex. And I could bore you with all of the details of that, but I won't, because that's not the point. The point is that if we claim to have an understanding of the human experience, the human condition, how life works, and we present that understanding, and it doesn't have universal relevance, or it doesn't stand up to scrutiny because it requires blind faith, or it requires a certain religious subscription or cultural background, then it's not universal. And if it's not universal, it can't be talking about the human experience. It's talking about a cultural experience or a religious experience. And that's where we go wrong, is that if we don't know what to look for, we'll buy into someone else's cultural interpretation or identity, and we'll adopt it as our own because we're looking for relief from what it is that we're struggling with. And that then comes at a price. So it's not that it doesn't work, but it comes at a price, and the price is that you have to compromise or even abandon, sacrifice your individuality or your identity because you don't find that who you are is received well by the group, by the social structure or the social circle that you're in. And that's why people then exit those spaces and go looking for acceptance or validation or even just resonance in other spaces. So when it comes to the human experience, it has to be something that stands up to scrutiny. It has to be logical. It can't be something that's based on unfounded theories, no matter how much diagnostic information we've got to back up those theories. Because until those theories actually prove causality, until it actually proves that this theory that supposes that this is present and that's why that human experience is a result of that, if that is not provable, not something that someone has to do mental gymnastics and all of that for to be able to see why it might have merit, but something that you hear it resonates, it connects, and that's it, done. That problem is solved and you can move on to the next problem. If it doesn't do that, if it doesn't have that kind of immediate impact and understanding, then we've lost the plot. Then we're not talking to the human anymore. We're talking to an academic, we're talking to philosophers, and we're talking to people who have time to dwell on the esoteric nature of life and all sorts of things, but we're not talking about the human experience. I've always maintained that the human experience is such that you shouldn't need a background in philosophy and psychology and all these different modalities before you can actually relate to the human experience. We're talking about the human experience. We're not talking of some a theory about how it is that the purpose of life comes together in some kind of distant land or distant church or distant mosque or some monastery or something. It's not about that. Religion has its place, but if religion doesn't answer the fundamental challenges faced by the average human, then it's a religion that is only specific to a certain setting or a certain group. And if you require blind faith to follow that and adopt it and implement it, then there's something wrong with either the supposed sources of that divine inspiration, or there's something horribly wrong with the way it's been interpreted and implemented. And it's mostly the latter that is a problem. But forget about religion. That's a hot topic on its own. There's a more pressing issue that I think is needs to be addressed. And that more pressing issue is the fact that we've got all of these modalities that have evolved over the years. And it goes everything from from NLP to CBT to the Reiki healing, the chakra healing, the yogic methods, the Eastern philosophies, and then you've got the Western philosophies, and you've got the Freudianisms, and all of this All of these wonderful ideas that are all intended, well intentioned, to want to alleviate the suffering of the human condition, of the human experience. But we're in 2024 now. We've got more access to mental health practitioners of any persuasion than we've ever had, probably in the history of mankind, millions of years. Yet we have a worsening social state. At which point do we stop and question whether we're on the right track or not? And it's not about me assuming that I know better than everyone else, but I'm just challenging what we've accepted to be true about our understanding of the human condition, what we understand to be true about the balance between life and spirituality, this body, mind, and soul balance, and all of these things. And this is what, through my own personal research, observation, and first-hand experiences, I can confirm, is that interventionist methodologies put you in a state of coping for the rest of your life. It creates a high-functioning victim. Mainstream psychology is opportunistic at best. It tries to find some sort of theoretical and philosophical explanation behind why it is that you struggle, but it doesn't offer you any solutions. The best solution psychology has come up with so far is a pill. Thousands of pills. We've got a pill for every condition. We've got a pill for every emotion. And that was what the intention was in the first place, was to develop a medication for every emotion. And it's robbed us of agency. But leave psychology and psychiatry aside. Let's look at all the other modalities, NLPs, the CBTs, all of these different interventionist methodologies. And I say interventionist because there's things like TRE, trauma release exercises, and there's other things about eye movement, and you name it, there's someone that's come up with an idea of how it is that it can solve a human problem. It's not that it doesn't work. It's that it has its place, and if we don't understand its place, we'll assume that it is the cure-all for everything that we need to figure out about life. And that's how we end up then separating ourselves from people that care about us, or we separate ourselves from people that we care about, because they just don't get us and we just don't get them. And that's another problem, is that if we're talking about solutions to the human experience, it mustn't create isolation, because isolation goes against human nature. We're social beings by nature. So if we come up with a solution, if we come up with a philosophy, with a modality, whatever it is that we come up with to assist people to work through the challenges that they're facing, for starters, we have to understand the human, not the condition. The condition is a result of the state of the human. The condition doesn't define the human. The human is the one that creates the condition. And that's a basic fundamental point of departure, that if you don't follow that, everything that you focus on is going to be a coping mechanism. It's going to be a defense mechanism or a coping mechanism, and nothing more than that. And what that does is it gives you a short-term fix. It gives you a short-term elation, euphoria even, release, relief, whatever it is. It gives you that. And because of that feeling of having some optimism, some hope about the fact that what was weighing you down doesn't weigh you down anymore, it's not going to weigh you down forever, that then convinces us that that is the way. But it has to be sustainable. It has to also make sure that how we got to that point that it alleviated, that we can actually make sure we don't get back to that point again. That's the problem with coping mechanisms. Coping mechanisms will fail you because a coping mechanism is designed to be effective within the context of the problem that you were experiencing at the time. And when we talk about the context of that problem, what we're talking about is that within that specific setting where you reached that point of duress and you needed to find answers and you needed to get rise above things and all of that, the coping mechanism that you develop will mitigate that situation, that outcome that you're in. That's what it will mitigate. Now, you become then emboldened and confident about the fact that I've got this, because look, I'm coping now. I'm able to navigate this space, and I'm out of that heaviness and all of that other stuff. And that's great, you got relief. But what you won't realize is that the context within which you developed that coping mechanism, that context changes because life happens. Life happens from directions and from perspectives and from quarters that you just can never predict, because there's just far too many variables to have a handle on to be able to see everything coming. So what happens then is that your circumstances change, it becomes more complex, more complicated, or there's some fundamental variables that are no longer at play, or there's new ones that come into play, and your coping mechanism then fails. And when your coping mechanism fails, you're less inclined to look at your coping mechanism because you don't see it as a coping mechanism. You saw it as a solution. So you don't look at that coping mechanism that you were relying on all the time. You look at how, once again, you're back where you were before. You don't know how you got there. And that's when we end up surrendering to things like destiny and fate, and it was meant to be, and I don't deserve more than this, or I'm just always going to create the same problems for myself, and the problem must be me. And all of the self-deprecating and self-defeating kind of mindsets then set in. Meanwhile, all that happened was we didn't realize that we were coping with the situation instead of overcoming it. And the difference between the two is the coping mechanism will undo the space you're in and allow you to move forward, whereas true understanding of the human experience and what got you to that point will ensure that what you did, what your contribution was, what you were not aware of, what were contributing factors that you didn't realize were at play, your understanding of all of that and the awareness of all of that will significantly improve your ability to navigate it more effectively in future, so that you don't find yourself back in that space again. And life is going to happen. It's always going to happen, because that's what life is about. So you can't expect to have solved a problem one time in your life and then that problem is never going to arise again. But this is where it really gets important and interesting, is that it's not about whether or not, say for example, depression. You reach the point of depression because things were really dreary and heavy and weighty and hopeless and everything else. And that's what depression is, right? The absence of hope about something important to you. And you reach that point for very good reason. And now you manage through one of these interventionist strategies or modalities or something to emerge from that space, and then you decided to have hope again about life or about relationships or whatever it was that was weighing you down. And you move forward in life. And you didn't really understand how you got yourself into that state of hopelessness in the first place. So you feel more enamored, you feel more confident, you feel more capable, and you push ahead. But then the original thinking that led to that point was never ever fully addressed. So you still have a significant portion of that perspective that still drives how you're approaching life now. And what happens then is that at some point, you're going to get to a point where you might have been naive or optimistic or too trusting or reckless or oblivious in how you made a decision about your life. And automatically, that will then lead to a point where there might be another betrayal of trust. There might be a disappointment. There might be things that just go your own, don't go your way, goes against what you want. And you have other environmental factors and industry factors that play against you that you didn't see developing because you didn't have sight of it or you didn't know to look for it. And then you end up again in that space where you feel depressed because things are just not working out again. Here's the important part, is that how often that happens is the one thing you have to focus on, the frequency. The other thing you got to focus on is what's the intensity of that experience when it happens again. And the third thing is how long does it take you to find your composure and regather your thoughts so that you can move on. So those three factors, frequency, intensity, and how long it takes you to recover from that space, those are the indicators of whether you're making progress or not. Not the fact that you never ever get depressed again, or you never get anxious again, or you never get angry again. It's not about never experiencing an emotion again. It's about when you experience the emotion again, how equipped are you to navigate it in a way that doesn't diminish the meaning of the impact of what it is that you experienced, but it also doesn't define how it is that you feel about what is to come. And the reason why these interventionist strategies, many of them that I mentioned already, and there's so many more, but I'm not going to, it's not about taking a dig at those strategies specifically. It's about understanding that if you take an interventionist approach to your life, the intervention is going to be only as effective as where your level of self-awareness is. All right? And it's self-awareness that's more important than anything else when it comes to this. And I'll tell you why. For example, if I rely on affirmations, affirmations demands that I have to believe something that I'm saying to myself, despite the reality of what I'm experiencing conflicting with that. Right? Because if the reality doesn't conflict with the affirmation, then it's not an affirmation, it's a reminder. And that's a critical difference that people just don't get. Is that if you want to remind yourself about the fact that you're not a bad person, that you make mistakes sometimes, and that maybe you were just distracted or overwhelmed or lost sight of something important. Those are reminders about the fact that that is not who you are and that you can rise above it. An affirmation is you treating people badly and saying, I'm a good person. But you're so oblivious to the fact that you are treating people badly because you feel justified in how you're treating them that you don't realize that you're causing harm, and then you blame them for distancing themselves from you because you think they don't appreciate you. That's what affirmations do. It distorts your perspective of reality. Now, that affirmation will only be true if your self-awareness and your level of general awareness is low. So effectively, the lower your self-awareness, the more effective interventionist strategies are. The higher your self-awareness, the less effective interventionist strategies are. And as you go through life and your awareness increases, because that's what life does to you, it makes you more and more aware of what you took for granted before. And as you go through life, as your awareness increases, those interventionist strategies that were coping mechanisms, they start failing. They start failing and they fail some more. And what happens then is that we then become more and more strained about how we try to figure out life. And that's why I believe the longer you live without those things being effectively resolved and understood, the greater your inclination is, or your predisposition is to getting chronic illnesses, because chronic illnesses is intense emotional duress. So the longer you live with emotional duress that cannot be resolved, or that is not understood, or that you're not willing to let go of, or you can't reconcile, the higher the probability that it will result in a physical ailment. And this is supported by science as well, so we won't get into that today. The point is that if you're relying on interventionist strategies and you don't realize that you are relying on interventionist strategies like NLP and CBT and all of these TREs and all of it, anything that alleviates your current situation but doesn't meaningfully resolve how you arrived at that point, it will fail you and it will hold you back in life, because it distracts you from your accountability, from your agency, from your contribution to how it is that you found yourself in that space, from what your ability is to be able to do something with what it is that you're encountering and change it for something better, for something more constructive and something more meaningful. And that's what we need to be more aware of, is that if we're going to invest in belief systems that don't answer real human problems, real human experiences, then you're effectively asking yourself to dumb down your humanness so that you can comply. And that's where religionists, people who are dogmatic about the implementation of a religious belief without understanding the wisdom and the value behind it, that's where they cause more problems than anything else. So no matter what your religious or spiritual persuasion is, or your cultural persuasion is, if you have to abandon logic in order to honor it, you've got a problem. Because that means you're relying on blind faith. You're not relying on conviction. And blind faith creates inflexibility, rigidity, fear, intolerance. Because then anything that challenges your faith-based association with what you think is important about life or the consequences of this life, anything that challenges that will feel like a personal attack. And that's why religion has become so divisive. That's why politics has become so divisive, or racism has become so divisive. Because the lower your self-worth, the more you're going to polarize towards things that can derive that respect that you're looking for from people. So if you don't respect who I am, you will respect me for being Muslim. Or you will respect what I believe in, my religion, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, whatever it is, Hinduism, you name it. And my association with this thing that has been legislated to be my right to practice freely and all of that, that becomes my call to arms. So you will respect that, or else you're disrespecting me. That's one of the most weak the weakest arguments you could ever make for why it is that you deserve respect. So, the more your self-worth is low, the lower your self-worth, the lower your self-esteem, the more you're going to rely on these institutions and these structures and these social structures and hierarchies and titles and stigmas to make sure that you don't become irrelevant to the people around you. And that's what most people are doing. They're afraid of becoming irrelevant. They're not focused on what value they can create because they believe in the value of what they want to create. They're focused on how do I remain relevant because I don't want to become invisible. And that's why we have so much of problems. That's why we have such strain in relationships and in families and in parent-child relationships, etc. Because everyone's looking to be respected, no one's looking to create value for each other. And you can't create value or look to create value for others if you need to be acknowledged and appreciated and celebrated and respected and revered and honored and awarded and all of that for what it is that you want to do or what it is that you did. Because your conviction in the value of what it is that you are capable of creating for others, that conviction, that principled conviction in the value of it, will drive you to do it for people who treat you badly. Not because they deserve you to do it or don't deserve you to do it, but because you know that it will be beneficial not just for them, but for others that are going to be affected by it as well, or others who are affected by their behavior. So then you will look to uplift and you will look to advise and you will look to support because you can, not because you should or you must or because they deserve it. And that's where authenticity comes from. Authenticity comes from doing what you do because you believe with conviction in the value of why you're doing it, not because it's the right thing to do. The moment you say it's the right thing to do, then it's relative to an external point of reference. Religion, morality, society, culture, law, whatever it is. And if that's what drives you, it might mitigate the amount of harm you cause. It might reduce that harm that you cause, or it might give you reason to try to aspire to be what you think is a good standing, and nothing wrong with that. Just understand what you're signing up for. Understand that you'll be driven by how well and how effective that is in creating the kind of social harmony that you're hoping for. And where it fails, because other people don't buy into it, you won't know how to respond to them if they don't subscribe to your philosophy, if they don't subscribe to your understanding or your inclination or your religion or whatever it is. And that's why it has to stand up to scrutiny. If you present what you claim to be a truth about the human experience, about emotions, about duress, about trauma, and all of these other horrific labels that we've come up with, if you claim to have a meaningful position on that, it has to transcend religion and culture and tradition and philosophies and all of that. It has to be able to stand in its own right in the present moment, regardless of what the background of the person is. You show me how many mainstream mental health philosophies, modalities, and other practices can do that. And then you'll see why we have such a problem. Why we have such a problem of violence and abuse and toxicity and mass shootings and genocides in our time, when we're supposed to be the most awakened of all the generations that came before us about humanity, about mental health, about psychology. We're fooling ourselves. And until we're ready to accept that we're fooling ourselves by buying into these things that haven't answered fundamental problems that we're facing as humanity, then we're never ever going to be able to shake it off or see the problems with it so that we can course correct. So, again, and this is going to be an unpopular view for a lot of people because they're going to see it as heretic in some ways. But if your beliefs cannot stand up to scrutiny of logic, it doesn't mean that your beliefs are wrong. It just means that you don't understand what you're subscribing to. And if you then, with conviction and sincerity, do scrutinize it from that perspective, and you find it to be lacking in some way, then that's the journey you need to take. You need to understand how it is that you reconcile that with your purpose in life, with your standing, with your convictions, with your authenticity, with what you believe, is what needs to be done or acted on to be a good human. And if you can't do that, you will be plagued with a lack of fulfillment and anxiety and frustration and a lack of purpose about life. And that's the thing. Everyone's looking to feel fulfilled. Everyone's looking to be significant, to know that their life mattered in a meaningful way. That when they're gone, it wouldn't just be as if they never existed. It's that there's a legacy that they've left behind of benefit that other people still experience. And if we know that we're going to be invisible to the timeline of life that extends beyond our time in this world, then that's a good reason to feel depressed. And that's probably the reason why a lot of people feel depressed, is because they have no reason to believe that what is important to them is going to leave any lasting impact on the people around them. So please be careful what you subscribe to. Be careful how it is that you surrender your sense of self and your agency, your free will, your consciousness, your critical thinking. Be careful how you surrender any of that to a philosophy or belief system or coping mechanism that is intended to give you the relief that you need in life. Because all you're doing is you are deferring, you are delaying the inevitable crash that comes with not having answers. And when you reach that point, you'll then have a very different motivator for why it is that you're going to take a critical view of all of the philosophies and spiritualities and religions and things that you might have considered to be authentic before that. And when you have that crisis of faith, if you don't have a solid support structure around you to help you navigate it, it becomes a very, very daunting space indeed. So, be careful what you subscribe to. Be careful what you buy into about mental health and mental illness and all that nonsense. Because you're a human first and foremost. And the human experience, I will always say, the human experience is not a mental illness. The human experience is a legitimate experience within the context of the life being lived. And if you understand that context, and you understand why it causes duress, and you understand why it causes anxiety, or why it is that you might be in fear, or why it is that you might be enraged about things, if you understand it, you can diffuse the underlying emotional turmoil so that you can move forward purposefully rather than move forward with coping mechanisms because you have to, because you're tired, because you're exhausted of trying to make it work with the wrong people or with the wrong group or with the wrong family or with the wrong social structure or community. If you don't understand, you become part of the problem, because what you think you're emboldened and empowered to claim for yourself, and you want to go in and then implement that somewhere else, you become an oppressor, because you automatically assume that everyone else is wrong and you're right. And it's not about everyone else being wrong and you're right. It's that within the context of every person's life, where they're at, they've got good reason to see things that way. And if you don't sensitize yourself to why they have reason to see it that way, you won't be able to reason with them why it is that there's more to it than just what they're considering. And that right there is the heart of empathy and compassion. So if you can't offer empathy and compassion to others, chances are you don't have empathy and compassion for yourself either. And that means you will be brutish, you will be aggressive, you will be so rigid and inflexible that you're going to convince yourself that it is through that rigidity and inflexibility that you're upholding something that should not be contaminated. And that's how cults and religionists and sectarianism and all of these social themes that play out so unhealthily for us, that's how those things are developed. It's developed from an absence of understanding and an absence of wisdom and a dogged kind of implementation of rules and a rules-based approach to life. Hopefully that gives you some insight into understanding why it is that we might be struggling in life. And to question all of that, you need to have a healthy grounding point, and that healthy grounding point is self-awareness. You have to understand who you are, what you're about, and why it is that you do what you do. And when you understand that, you'll know what questions to ask or where to look for answers. But if you don't understand that, you're going to be looking for solutions that worked for someone else that you can implement in your life and hope that it will give you the kind of relief that you see it gave them. And if it does, it will give you interim relief. And if you stop at that point, that's you adopting a coping mechanism. Be careful. Give yourself more airtime and more effort than that. Give life more effort than that. Life is not about distractions. Life is about finding something amazing in the most mundane of spaces. Life is about realizations and about discovery and exploration and curiosity and creating value where you never expected to, or finding value where you never expected to. Life is about all of those things. It's not about fear. It's not about the fear of what happened next. It's not about the fear of what would happen if you didn't. If you're driven by fear, you will be a very unpleasant person to be around. No matter how nice and how sincere you are to the people around you, you will be killing the spirit of the people around you, because your spirit is already being killed, because you're stifling your spirit through this fear-based approach to life. I hope that gives you reason for pause if you are on this journey of trying to figure out what went wrong in life or how life works because you didn't have the best of beginnings or you didn't have the healthiest role models. You figure these things out when you start seeking to understand yourself, and you can't seek to understand yourself if you're looking at yourself with a judgment. You need to reflect, you need to observe, you need to suspend judgment and seek understanding so that you can deal with what comes out in that process, rather than judging who's right, who's wrong, and what's right and what's wrong, and then just blindly implementing that because that's what the norms and the people around you say is important. Give yourself a break. Take time to step back and just introspect a bit. Not from a position of what you think others will think, or what society says, or what religion says. Just introspect. And if you're sincerely seeking the truth, you'll find it. Always. Because truth, by design, will prevail over anything that is false. Any false claims will always fall by the wayside because it requires effort to maintain a falsity. Whereas truth itself will always rise to the surface because it just cannot be denied. Take care.